what's the difference between the 100K pros versus the 100K average Joes? See, with the pros, the arrow goes up. With the Joes, the arrow goes down. What does that mean? See, especially as we talk about auctions, and this is specifically sheriff sales. If you know what you're doing at sheriff sales, I mean, literally, you can make $100,000 within a deal or two. And if you don't know what you're doing at a sheriff sales, you're going to lose 100,000 or two in one or two deals. So my question is, what is the difference? Is it because the pros are special? No. Is it because the average Joe who walks in off the street into these auctions is not so special? Certainly not. See, the difference is specialized knowledge. And there are specifically 4 key factors that I want to lay out. And if you can control these 4 key factors, you can go from an average Joe to the pro and buying properties at the highest level, something where we buy properties. So let's kind of go through it. So let me take this out, and I want to kind of just list them out, and I want to explain what these factors are. The number one thing, whenever somebody talks about buying properties at a sheriff's sale, that is the most dangerous place in the foreclosure process you can ever buy the property. It doesn't matter if it's a tax sale, it doesn't matter anything else. The wild, wild west of real estate when buying properties is the sheriff sales. Why? This is the number one thing why. It's the title. And if you don't know what a title of a property is, you really have a problem. So how does it relate to you? So what is a title on a property? See, most people know what a deed is. What is a deed? A deed is basically a vehicle through which you're transferring the property from Mr. Smith, who owns the property now, to, let's just say, Tom, who would like to own the property in the future. At the time of closing, Mr. Smith signs a deed over to, he's deeding his property over to the new buyer, who is Mr. Tom, right? That's the way we transfer title. In this case, whenever a property is owned by one person who has clean title, what does that mean? There's no liens, there's nothing on the title, it's a clean title. I can just sign a piece of paper that is basically with certain words on it in a certain legal format, and I can sell my property to whoever I want. But my question is this. Let's say if I have a property that I own, and that property is worth $100,000. So you decide to pay me $100,000 for that property. What if there's a lien on the property that's worth $200,000? So can you buy the property? Of course. You can buy the property all day long. But the problem is this, the big caveat is when I'm selling you the property, if I take the $100,000 and the lien is not cleared on that property, guess what you ended up with? You didn't end up with the property for $100,000. You ended up with the property subject to the lien. See, the biggest danger at auctions is that people don't understand what clean title means. And the reason why this is so critical, that whenever people go and bid on the sheriff sales, the time that they have to make a decision, typically it's maybe 5-6 hours, and most of the times 1 or 2 hours they have to decide whether they're going to buy a property. And guess what happens? The biggest mistake they don't make is they either don't know how to check title, or they check it themselves, or they have their attorney friend or somebody check the title, and guess what? They make a mistake. The biggest place where people lose is this. Why? Because people will buy at sheriff's sale. Guess what happens? Let's say there are 2 mortgages on the property. They don't tell you if they're selling mortgage number 1 or if they're selling mortgage number 2. In fact, they don't even tell you whether any of that title, any of the mortgages that are being sold, if they are any good. They could have 3 mortgages on the property, and the third one could be sold. And if you don't know how to do the research, if you don't have somebody who's really, really good to do that for you, guess what happens? You end up paying $50,000, $60,000, $100,000, $200,000 for a property that you will never own. And this is 100% legal. That is the most dangerous thing at when somebody is buying at sheriff's sale. So how do we buy? See, we have a relationship with one of the biggest title companies in town, and we have another attorney downtown. Both of them simultaneously do searches for us every single day. They're running 30, 40, 50 titles every single day for all the counties for us, so that we have done our research. Even for people in Mastery, we're never going to allow them to bid on properties without checking title. So the first thing you have to understand is, how do you check title? Number two, the most important part, is understanding the property condition and the hidden defects. See, why are auctions dangerous? If you've covered your title part of it, right? You've figured out, and you know now, because of listening to this recording, that, hey, checking title is important. And this happens all the time, at least once a month. I'll get a call, or I know somebody who goes to the auction, this is their first or second time buying, and guess what happens? They look at the property, they look at it on Google Maps, and they're like, oh my God, it's a beautiful 3-flat. And they go buy, bid it at the auction, and win. And then they go to the property to find out that the city has torn down the property, or the property is marked for, it's a condemned property, it's a scavenger property, and it's going to be basically be torn down. Or they find out that the property doesn't have a foundation, or they find out that the condition of the property is not what they thought, or they find out that, you know, a month ago when I looked at the property, it was perfect. People were living in it, and 10 days ago there was a fire. See, the biggest mistake that most investors make whenever they're buying the property, number one is title, number two is they don't understand the condition of the property before they bid, and the second thing is they don't understand the hidden defects as to which properties have foundations and which don't. Which are the properties that make sense to buy, and what are the things to look for when they're buying the property. See, what separates the average Joe from the pro is that pros, number one, do their homework when doing research on the property in terms of condition of the property and what to expect based on the key factors that they understand because of the experience. Whereas the average Joe doesn't even know what to look for. Number three factor. So the second factor I'm going to write down is property condition, C-O-N-D. So number three, what's the most important thing when buying at auctions? See, the next thing is going to be occupied versus vacant. See, if the property is vacant, it's easy, right? It's very simple. A lot of times people are like, well, I don't have to worry about it if the property is vacant. True, most of the times, unless a squatter moves in or something like that, which is very, very rare. Now, on a vacant property, though, it's tougher to buy because how do you know how long the property's been vacant? If it's been vacant, is the copper still there? Has somebody stolen the inside of the property? Is there a lot of damage? Typically, and this is not a rule of thumb, but typically, if a property is occupied, maybe it may be in better condition a lot of times. Not always. Sometimes there are horrendous properties, but a lot of times they may be in better condition. The more important question is that how does a property that is occupied become a challenge? Well, what if you have to do eviction? What is the average time that in our market it takes to do an eviction? See, if you're in Cook County, it's going to be a minimum of 6 months, minimum. It's most likely, if it's an auction property you bought, it's going to be 6 to 9 months being the average when you can evict somebody. Now, people like us do evictions all the time, but here's the difference. See, if I know the property is occupied, I've then checked the condition and I've done my homework, and I'm going to pay a 6 to 7% less for the property, guess what I've done? See, I've built in the margin as I go into the property. So it's very important to understand whether the property is occupied and whether it's vacant. And the most important thing, if it's in the city of Chicago and the property has tenants, you want to make sure you build in even a bigger margin so that you can actually get them evicted, especially if they have a bona fide lease. Number 4 is the other big challenge. And this is something that really should be common sense, but sometimes common sense is the most uncommon thing within people, which is all cash. Now, we all know that all these auctions that are sheriff sales, they require all cash. But yet you won't believe that we get calls time after time after time where people will go pay the money on the first day, the 30, 40,000, whatever's needed, to basically the 25% down or the 10% down, depending on the requirement of the county. And then they'll call me and go, Andrew, do I really have to pay the rest in cash by tomorrow at 12 o'clock? And I'm like, yes, you do. Because guess what? If you don't, and if you don't perform on it, guess what happens? They keep your money. The sheriff's sales does not refund you your money. So those are the four biggest things. Now, most of them, this part of it should never happen because you should have your ducks in a row. This part of it, you should do your homework on. See, the two of these that are the most important and the most critical that require expertise are the title search and the property condition. Because doing title search on one or two properties is easy. But how do you run title searches on such volume of properties? And the second part of it is, how do you understand the condition of the property without ever going inside of it? I wish I could cover all these details today, but please keep an eye out for more videos and more of these educational videos to come. Thanks, have a great day.